The rain lashes against the floor-to-ceiling glass of the corner office, each drop a tiny hammer blow against the silence. Outside, the city lights bleed into a watery smear, a million scattered lives carrying on, oblivious. Inside, the air is thick and cold, heavy with the smell of old money and impending storm. My fingers trace the edges of the document spread across the polished mahogany desk. It's a deed, a perfectly legal, beautifully bound document detailing the transfer of ownership for a penthouse unit. $3.5 million. Cash. My breath hitches, shallow and sharp. This isn't just a piece of paper. This is a bullet, fired clean through the life I thought I had. It's not the money. Not really. It's the address. It's the name of the buyer. And it's the name of the person who lives there now. Someone who is not me. If this story feels like a punch to the gut, or if you've ever felt the ground drop out from under you, tell me in the comments below where you're watching from and what time it is. And please, if you haven't already, take a second to subscribe. It truly helps bring more of these stories to life. Life before the penthouse was a gilded cage. I see that now, but I didn't feel the bars then. I felt secure. Loved. My marriage to David was the centerpiece. 10 years. A decade built on what I believed was shared ambition, mutual respect, and a quiet, comfortable love that felt like coming home. He was the sharp, charming CEO, always one step ahead, lauded in the business world. I was from the family with the trust. The kind of trust that didn't just hold assets, it was the asset. It held land, developed properties, funded ventures David often circled like a hawk, eager for opportunity. My role was less defined. I sat on the board, attended meetings, understood the scale of our legacy, but I wasn't in the day-to-day trenches. I was happy supporting David, building our life, watching him rise, feeling like his success was my success, built on the foundation of our shared stability. We had the sprawling house in the hills, the quiet dinners, the easy laughter over weekend coffee. It felt real. It felt solid. The first crack was tiny, almost imperceptible. An email notification on his laptop I saw over his shoulder one morning. A name I didn't recognize in the subject line, linked to a property address downtown. It vanished quickly as he closed the screen, but the name, Isabella, lingered. Harmless, I told myself. A new client, maybe. Business. He was always dealing with new people, new deals. I pushed it away. The surface of our life was too smooth, too perfect, to allow for ripples of suspicion. But the name gnawed at me, a little mouse scratching inside the walls. Then came the odd hours, the late nights that stretched into early mornings, the excuses that felt thin and rehearsed. The usual explanations, a big deal closing, a crisis at the office, started to sound like a broken record. The intimacy between us didn't just fade, it felt withdrawn. Like his mind was elsewhere, constantly. His phone was always on silent, always face down. A cold knot began to form in my stomach, tightening with each passing week. I found myself watching him, analyzing his expressions, searching for the man I thought I knew. He was there, physically, but the light in his eyes seemed dimmed, or perhaps redirected towards a horizon I couldn't see. The quiet, comfortable love I cherished began to feel like a performance he was tired of giving. The whispers started subtly, carried on the wind of the city's gossip. Hints of David's frequent presence at a new, exclusive building downtown. Rumors linking his name with a woman striking, ambitious, not his wife. I dismissed them, fiercely at first. People talk. They're jealous. Our life was enviable. But the whispers grew louder, harder to ignore, echoing the unease already growing inside me. I started checking things I never had before. His call logs, oddly sparse for a CEO. His credit card statements, expenses I couldn't account for, large sums marked vaguely as consulting fees or investment charges. The addresses linked to these charges led downtown, always downtown, near that new building people were talking about. My heart began to race erratically, a frantic drumbeat against my ribs. The mouse in the wall wasn't just scratching, it was gnawing, louder and louder. The first major blow landed not with a bang, but a bureaucratic sigh. An invoice mistakenly sent to our home address instead of his office. It was for high-end furniture installation, at an address I didn't recognize. That address was in the new building, the exclusive one. My hands trembled as I held the paper. Furniture. For whom? My mind scrambled, searching for a logical explanation. A new office space? An investment property? David had never mentioned either. I confronted him. He brushed it off, irritated. Just a small investment property I'm flipping. Nothing for you to worry about. His eyes didn't meet mine. The lie hung in the air, thick and suffocating. I knew, with a chilling certainty that went deeper than logic, that he wasn't telling the truth. The knot in my stomach twisted into a hard, painful ball. My comfortable life was cracking open, revealing something ugly beneath. My early attempts to understand were clumsy, fueled by pain and panic. I hired a private investigator, a quiet, gray man named Arthur, who moved like a shadow. His reports were factual, devoid of judgment, but each word felt like a stab. David's movements, his meetings, his frequent visits to that downtown address. The description of the woman who lived there, Isabella. Beautiful, young, connected, apparently. The investigator also confirmed David's significant financial transfers. Large sums moved discreetly between accounts, vanishing into offshore havens or reappearing as anonymous investments. The money wasn't just gone, it was being hidden. He was building a separate life, brick by careful brick, using resources I thought were ours, resources potentially linked to the very foundation of my family's wealth. The emotional pain was crippling. Grief, betrayal, a cold, creeping fear. The man I loved, the man I trusted implicitly, was a stranger building something with another woman, something he was actively hiding from me. My world shrank to the size of that pain, a constant, suffocating pressure behind my eyes. I felt exposed, vulnerable, the envy of others now just a cruel, mocking joke. The gilded cage was real, and I was trapped inside while he built another one elsewhere. The crisis deepened with every new piece of information. The money transfers became clearer. He wasn't just moving funds, he was liquidating assets, mortgaging properties we co-owned without my explicit knowledge, leveraging lines of credit using our shared wealth. It wasn't just pocket money for a mistress, it was a calculated financial extraction. He was siphoning off the liquidity preparing for what? A grand exit? A new life built on the ruins of mine? The scale of his deceit was breathtaking, a vast, intricate tapestry woven from lies and stolen resources. I walked through our beautiful home, the place filled with memories, and saw it through new eyes, not a sanctuary, but a shell being hollowed out from the inside. Every object felt tainted, every shared space a reminder of his performance. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford, my nights spent staring at the ceiling, tracing the patterns of potential ruin, replaying every interaction, searching for the signs I had missed, the moments he had lied, the chinks in his armor. Arthur, my quiet shadow, found the first solid link between the money and the penthouse. A paper trail, meticulously hidden within layers of shell corporations and offshore accounts, leading back to the purchase of a specific unit in that downtown building. Unit 42A. The price tag? $3.5 million. Paid in cash. My hands shook so violently I couldn't hold the report steady. $3.5 million. For a place for her. While he told me he was working late, while he slept beside me, he was funneling millions into this secret life. The sheer audacity of it was staggering. My heart didn't just break. It shattered into a million frozen pieces inside my chest. All seemed lost. My marriage was a lie, my financial security compromised, my future uncertain. I felt like I was drowning in the cold, dark water of his betrayal, the city lights above blurring into an unreachable surface. I was sitting in the boardroom of the family trust, the polished surface reflecting the sterile light of the overhead fixtures. The air was always dry in here, smelling faintly of old paper and cautious money. We were reviewing quarterly reports, discussing development projects, property acquisitions, portfolio performance. My mind was a million miles away, still stuck on Unit 42A, the 3.5 million, the name Isabella. I traced the pattern on the table, trying to focus. My uncle, the chairman, droned on about our latest urban development project. He mentioned the name of the holding company, the one that owned the developer handling the project. A name I knew intimately, a name that represented a significant portion of the trust's assets. He talked about the success of their newest residential tower downtown. The one people were calling exclusive. The one at that address. My blood ran cold. The words seemed to echo from a distance. Our investment in Sterling Developments continues to yield significant returns. The success of the Grand Meridian Tower has exceeded projections. Unit sales have been brisk, particularly in the upper floors. The Grand Meridian. Unit 42A. 3.5 million. My family trust. My family trust owned Sterling Developments. Sterling Developments built the Grand Meridian. My family trust, the source of my family's legacy, the bedrock of my security, owned the developer that built the very building where David had secreted away his mistress and the life he was building with her. The building where he had spent $3.5 million of potentially misappropriated funds. The revelation hit me with the force of a physical blow, stealing the air from my lungs. It wasn't just betrayal anymore. It was cosmic irony. He had built his secret kingdom on land, literally, that my family owned. He had used the system, the structures, the wealth connected to me, to betray me. And in doing so, he had walked right into the heart of the spiderweb I had been born into, a web he didn't even know existed. The despair didn't vanish, but it was suddenly eclipsed by something else. A cold, clear surge of power. The drowning sensation receded, replaced by the feeling of solid ground beneath my feet. I wasn't just a victim drowning in his lies. I was standing on the very foundation he had tried to undermine. And that foundation was mine. The feeling of power was intoxicating, a sudden rush after months of feeling helpless and broken. But it was a cold power, tempered by the bitter taste of betrayal. I didn't tell anyone about my discovery. Not Arthur, not my family. The knowledge was too potent, too dangerous, to share prematurely. It was my secret weapon. I continued the investigation, but my focus shifted. It wasn't just about documenting David's affair and financial misdeeds. It was about understanding the exact nature of the penthouse purchase. How was the deed structured? Were there any specific clauses related to the development? Were there any trust provisions or development agreements he might have unknowingly violated? I delved into the trust documents, the labyrinthine legal agreements that governed our assets. I spent hours with our trust lawyers, ostensibly on routine matters, subtly probing about development agreements, the complexities of ownership structures within our holding companies, the legal nuances of property transfers within our portfolio. They were thorough, precise, and utterly unaware of the storm gathering around one of their beneficiaries' husbands. I learned about specific covenants tied to properties developed under certain trust entities, clauses related to sourcing of funds for large purchases within our own developments, even obscure rules about board approval for significant transactions linked to specific projects. It was dry, dense reading, but every paragraph felt like sharpening a blade. The more I learned, the more I realized the depth of the legal and financial trap David had potentially walked into. He thought he was so clever moving money, hiding assets, creating layers of distance. But he had done it all within a framework controlled by the very family he was betraying. The arrogance of it was astounding. He was so focused on the mistress and the money, he never looked up to see whose sky he was flying under. My internal monologue became a constant strategy session. How to use this? Not just for divorce, not just for financial recovery, but for something more. Something that would reflect the sheer scale of his deceit and the irony of his self-inflicted downfall. This wasn't just about getting my share. It was about dismantling his carefully constructed lie, brick by brick, penthouse included. My sorrow hardened into a cold, quiet rage. I no longer cried. I planned. The physical pain in my chest subsided, replaced by a steel core of resolve. I was still in the crisis, navigating the treacherous waters of his lies, but I wasn't drifting helplessly anymore. I had a compass, and I knew exactly where I was steering the ship, towards a reckoning he could never see coming. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place weeks later. I had found a specific clause in the original development agreement for the Grand Meridian Tower, an agreement drafted years ago by the Trust's legal team. It stipulated that for any unit purchased outright, i.e., without traditional bank financing, which was David's method, cash, the source of funds had to be disclosed to the developer's board within a certain time frame. It was an anti-money laundering measure, standard for high-end cash transactions, but particularly strict within our trust's operations due to specific portfolio regulations. David had masked the source of his funds through layers of offshore accounts and shell companies. He had successfully hidden it from me, and likely from general scrutiny. But he hadn't disclosed it to the developer's board. The developer owned by my family trust. The time frame for disclosure had passed. The penalty? At the discretion of the board, it could include voiding the sale, seizing the asset, or forcing a public disclosure of the beneficial owner and the source of funds. He hadn't just bought the penthouse. He had bought it in a way that made it inherently vulnerable, sitting like a ticking time bomb in the heart of my family's empire. This was the turning point. My path was clear. No more hiding, no more quiet investigation. It was time to step out of the shadows and wield the power I held. I scheduled a meeting with David. Not at home, not at his office. I chose a neutral, sterile conference room downtown, one known for its discretion. I wanted it cold, professional, devoid of the emotional clutter of our shared life. Arthur prepared a binder for me, neat, organized, damning. The email notification, the invoice, the investigator's reports, the financial trails, the property records, the specific clause from the development agreement, the confirmation from the trust's legal team about the non-disclosure penalty. It was the story of his betrayal, laid bare, cross-referenced with the legal framework he had blundered into. I felt unnervingly calm. The storm inside me had passed, leaving behind a landscape of quiet devastation and steely resolve. This wasn't revenge fueled by emotion. It was justice served with cold, calculated precision. I was ready. The conference room was silent, save for the hum of the ventilation. David sat across from me, looking slightly bewildered. He expected tears, accusations, maybe a dramatic exit. He did not expect this. I didn't raise my voice. My tone was flat, factual, like reading a business report. I started with the email, the name Isabella, the address. His face paled slightly, but he still tried to bluff. What is this? Are you spying on me? I ignored him and laid out the invoice for the furniture. You said this was an investment property. You were flipping. I slid Arthur's report across the table. Arthur's report confirms Unit 42A is occupied full-time. By Isabella. His jaw tightened. The bluff was failing. He leaned forward, his voice low, menacing. What do you want? Money? A divorce? We can negotiate. He still thought he was in control, that he held the cards. He had no idea. I want you to understand the depth of your mistake. David, I opened the binder to the section on the financial transfers. $3.5 million. Funds moved from our joint accounts, from leveraged assets I co-own. Funneled through shell corporations and offshore accounts. I met his eyes. You bought a penthouse. He shifted, a flicker of pride, quickly masked, crossing his face. So? I made an investment. It's my money. It's our money, David. And it's not just any penthouse. I paused, letting the silence stretch, building the tension. It's Unit 42A in the Grand Meridian Tower, built by Sterling Developments. He nodded, impatient. Yes, it's a prime property. A solid asset. This was it. The moment. My voice dropped, colder than the rain outside. Do you know who owns Sterling Developments, David? He frowned, confused. Some holding company, I assume. Doesn't matter. It matters, I said softly, a dry humor touching the edges of my voice. Because the holding company that owns Sterling Developments is the Lockhart Trust. My family's trust. His eyes widened, the color draining completely from his face. The smug confidence vanished, replaced by utter, disbelieving shock. "The building you bought for your mistress, David," I continued, leaning forward slightly, watching him shatter in real time. "The $3.5 million asset you funneled money into and lied to me about was built and is indirectly owned by my family. The ground it sits on, the steel in its frame, the very air rights above it, it's all tied back to the Lockhart Trust." He stammered, searching for words, for an angle. That changes nothing. I bought the unit. It's mine. The trust doesn't own individual units. Legally, yes, you bought the unit. But you bought it in a way that violated the development agreement. I turned to the final section of the binder, showing him the clause. Cash transaction over $3 million required disclosure of the source of funds to the Sterling Development's board within 60 days. You bought it 6 months ago. No disclosure was made. He stared at the paper, his face a mask of horror. He hadn't known. He had been so focused on hiding the money from me, from the taxman, that he had missed the critical detail, the Achilles heel built into the very structure of his grand gesture. "The penalty for non-disclosure," I explained, my voice still quiet, lethal, "is at the discretion of the Sterling Board. A board which is appointed by the Lockhart Trust. A board where I hold a seat." His mouth opened and closed, no sound coming out. His eyes darted around the room. Trapped. "So, David," I finished, a cold satisfaction settling deep in my bones, "you didn't just lie to me and steal from me. You built your little love nest inside the walls of my family's fortress. And you did it in a way that allows the fortress to collapse it whenever it chooses. You thought you had a $3.5 million asset. What you actually have is a very expensive, very public monument to your infidelity, sitting on land owned by the woman you betrayed, subject to seizure by her family's trust." He had walked into the heart of the spiderweb, not knowing it was there, and expected to walk out with a fly. Instead, he was tangled, caught, the spider's fangs sinking in. His betrayal hadn't given him a new life. It had given him a cage built by his own hand, controlled entirely by mine. He was completely blindsided, his elaborate scheme turning to dust around him. I hadn't just survived. I had turned the instrument of his betrayal into the weapon of his undoing. The penthouse wasn't his victory, it was my Trojan horse. The aftermath was swift, brutal, and delivered with quiet efficiency. David crumpled. The man who had been so confident, so charming, so utterly convinced of his own cleverness, broke down right there in that sterile room. He begged, he pleaded, he threatened. It was pathetic. I simply stood up, leaving the binder on the table. "My lawyer will be in touch regarding the divorce and the recovery of misappropriated funds," I said. "As for Unit 42A, the Sterling Board will be discussing it at their next meeting." There was no mistaking the implication. He had bought a phantom. The trust lawyers handled everything, discreetly, professionally. The details of the non-disclosure penalty were brought before the Sterling Development's board. I recused myself from the vote, but my presence, my story, loomed large. The board, protective of the trust's reputation and capital, voted unanimously. The penthouse sale was voided. Not just taken from Isabella, but effectively erased from David's possession. The $3.5 million, traced back through the labyrinthine accounts, was reclaimed by the trust, later to be factored into the divorce settlement which heavily favored me. David's world imploded. The scandal, though carefully managed by the trust's PR team to protect the Lockhart name, was devastating enough to his reputation that his company's board forced his resignation. He lost his career, his reputation, the mistress, who, it turned out, was less interested in him without the penthouse, and the vast majority of his wealth. He was left with little more than the wreckage of his own hubris. For me, the victory was bittersweet. The cold satisfaction of seeing his elaborate betrayal backfire so spectacularly was undeniable. It was a potent, intoxicating feeling of vindication. But it couldn't erase the years of lies, the fundamental violation of trust, the quiet death of a marriage I had believed in. I walked away financially secure, legally protected, and with a profound, painful understanding of human nature, particularly the capacity for deceit in those closest to us. The gilded cage was gone, shattered by David's own actions. I was free, yes, but into a world that felt colder, harder. The divorce was finalized, the legal battle settled. The money recovered, the properties divided. Unit 42A was put back on the market by Sterling Developments, eventually selling for even more than David had paid. Life goes on. The city lights still smear against the glass when it rains, but they look different now. Less romantic, more like a million isolated points of light in a vast, indifferent darkness. I learned that the most dangerous betrayals aren't always loud and dramatic. Sometimes they are quiet, meticulously planned, built on foundations you never thought to question. And sometimes the greatest power isn't in fighting back with anger, but in understanding the system, finding the hidden weaknesses, and letting the betrayer trip over their own carefully laid traps. The penthouse was his intended monument to a new life. It became the tombstone for his old one. And I, the quiet woman who sat on the board, the woman he underestimated, was the one who placed it there. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever had to find strength you didn't know you possessed in the face of betrayal, I'd love to hear your version. Drop a comment below with where you're listening from and what time it is. And thank you for being here. Subscribing helps bring more of these stories to life.